And we're going to take a look this evening at really a single verse of the Torah, and really a single space in the Torah. You know, we've talked about, we can spend a whole hour on just one verse. We've talked about, well, we can spend a whole hour on even just one word. This might be the first time we spend a whole hour on a space in between two words. Why does the Torah hide what Cain said? Well, first of all, we got to ask the question, before we can answer what that means, we got to know, well, what did Cain say? You guys know the story of Cain and Abel, right? Another couple of folks that got along really well. One of them went east of Eden. You see? Tie in. So you've got Cain and Abel. They're these two brothers. They both give an offering to God. And Cain gave an offering of plants, is vegetarian. Got to watch out for those vegetarians. Abel offered up a sheep from his flock, and God acknowledged, I'm going to loosely translate, God acknowledged Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's sacrifice. Here's the passage in question. Adonai said to Cain, "Why are you so distressed, and why is your face fallen? Surely, if you do right, there is uplift." Also pay attention, for those of you literary folks here, to the use of direction up and down, up and down. It's throughout this passage. Why are you so distressed, and why is your face fallen? That's a good translation of the Hebrew, nafal. Surely if you, nafal is the root. You won't find nafal if you open it up. I forget the conjugation. It's some other conjugation, but it's a fallen face. Surely if you do right, there is uplift. You can be uplifted. But if you do not do what is right, if you do not do what is right, sin crouches at the door. Again, this low imagery. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master. And the word master in Hebrew, actually, I need to double check myself here that I'm looking at. Decide which Bible can I find it in most quickly. If I recall correctly, the word master also has to do with a higher elevation, one who's above. We're looking, way too far. 9. I don't have the Hebrew in front of me right now, so I want to double check, because I'll never lie to you. I might get things wrong once in a while, but I'll never lie to you. Okay. Why are you so crestfallen? I don't know, but if you do what is right, I know this is very exciting watching a rabbi read from a Ovetz Aich. Tishmolbo. I was wrong. It's a different word for master. So in this case, it's a different word for master. It's not about one who's above. That comes a little bit later. All right. Cain said to his brother Abel, ... This ... If you open up your translation, if you see ... you've got a good translation. It's being honest with you. If you open it up and your translation has something other than ... the author has filled something in there. They've gotten a little bit of help or gotten a little bit creative with the translation. How many of you have a translation sitting in front of you? Almost everybody. How many of you have ... in your translation? I was able to find, if you've got the new JPS, which actually it's the version I have at my house. I don't know if I've got a just Stom regular copy here. Then it might have the ... in there, the 1985. Almost any other and there's one other that I found, but I forgot which one it is. Of all the translations that I looked at, and there are dozens and dozens of different translations of the Bible, as you know, I could only find two that had ... Even some very scholarly, academic, very smart people who are looking at just transmitting the literal text don't use ... I'm going to explain why that ... has to be there in just a moment. Cain said to his brother Abel ... Nobody has a ... I thought at least one person would find a translation with ... Okay. If you go, you've heard me talk about Sepharia. If you go on sepharia.org, you can look up, they have the 1985 JPS translation, which is the most standard, neutral. I think every other translation since 1985 has been responding to something. Women's commentary is heavily based on the 1985 JPS. They actually credit it as, if you read the front matter, they actually credit it as the JPS 1985, but they have done it's heavily edited and revised. Just not quite to the point of being an original translation, but it's almost, in many passages, it's almost an original translation. But you do have ... Okay. I know, it's called an ellipsis. I should use the right word. There's a word for it. It's not just ... I can every time I say that, I see you guys can see the look that I'm getting on from some of the folks on Zoom. When they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother. Now here it's not a good translation. It really should be, does anybody have something like he set upon his brother, or rose up against his brother? You've got something like this. Somebody's got rose up, or set upon, rose up against. That's a better translation, and it captures that sense of rising and falling, that up and down, this sort of tension between these sort of forces of up and down that's throughout this passage. Cain set upon, okay, upon, I guess, there's a little bit there above his brother Abel and killed him. Adonai said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" And he said, "I do not know. Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper?" This is a phrase, even if you've never heard of Cain and Abel, and I know you all have, but even if you haven't heard of Cain and Abel, you've heard this phrase, "Am I my brother's keeper?" This is probably, Cain's greatest hits. That's like number one. Let's take a closer look at, oops. Cain said to his brother Abel, ... Okay, ellipsis. We'll stick with ellipsis from now on. Well, we want to know what this means. We've got this strange verse. We've got the, if you've got the Hebrew in front of you, you can see Vayomer, which is, we'll talk about Vayomer in just a minute. Vayomer means there's a quote coming up. If you see Vayomer, it says either right after that or sometimes at the end of the phrase, you've got a quote, a direct quote. Let's see what's going on with this ellipsis. And Cain spoke to Abel. How does Rashi explain it? Well, he says it's not that Cain said to his brother Abel, it's just that Cain spoke in general. Rashi uses this translation that sort of smooths it over, right? We don't see any gap here. We're going to just sort of smooth it over like butter. Cain spoke to Abel, or this translation of Rashi, and Cain spake to Abel. It's a fun translation. All right. He began an argument, striving and contending with him to seek a pretext to kill him. There are midrashic explanations of these words, meaning the gap between these words, but this is the plain sense of the text. So Rashi here has done something extraordinary. If you spend a lot of time with Rashi, like I do, and I know some of you do, if you spend a lot of time with Rashi, you know Rashi never goes against the Midrash. Rashi loves the Midrash. I shouldn't say never. He rarely goes against the Midrash. When there's a difficult text, Rashi will very often pull up the Midrash and say, see, here's the explanation. Sometimes he will also offer a secondary explanation. But here he doesn't even cite the Midrash. He says, there is Midrash that explains this. These are early rabbinic texts when we're talking about Midrash, right? You all know what Midrash is? This is early rabbinic text that's meant to fill in the gaps in the Torah. Rashi says, just ignore that stuff. We're not going to pay attention to it. Let's take a look at another commentator, Ibn Ezra. One of my favorites. Ibn Ezra often comments when there's something unusual happening in the text. He's the only classical commentator that will point out anachronisms, for example. He'll say, how can it be, the other side of the Jordan when Moses never crossed the Jordan? How can he be talking about himself being on the other side of the Jordan River? This is a very famous passage from Ibn Ezra. So he likes to find points where the text as we've received it of the Hebrew Bible, the traditional text has unusual characteristics. He says, it seems to me that Cain said to Abel all the ways which God had rebuked him. Because before that, God said, why are you so upset? Why are you so crestfallen? Crestfallen, that would be a good translation. Does anybody have crestfallen, or did I just come up with that? You've got the fallen, you've got, why is your face crestfallen? Perfect. That's what it should be. Everybody write that down, take a pen, cross out your, don't write in your Bible. That's a joke. You can if you want. It's your Bible. Cain said to his brother, Cain said, it seems to me that Cain said to Abel all the ways that God rebuked him. So here, even Ibn Ezra says, let's just fill this in. Cain said something. It doesn't matter what he said. Probably, we've got the stuff that came right before that. God is rebuking Cain. So what is Cain going to say? He probably just said all the stuff that God had said to him. And then he has this very strange phrase. He says, one must have been born on a bleak day to ask the question. Now, this is another thing that Ibn Ezra likes to do, which is when there's something that's a little bit problematic, he likes to point it out. When there's something extremely problematic, then he likes to make sort of an offhand reference, these very coded, shrouded comments that seem like non sequiturs. It seems like they don't line up, they don't make sense. What does it have to do with anything? Where essentially in this case he's saying, you must be either, we don't know what he means by a bleak day, either you were born on meaning a cloudy rainy day, either you have real darkness in your soul to wonder what did Cain say to his brother before he killed him, like what's the matter with you, why would you ask that, why would you want to know that? Or it could just be a euphemism for you must be really dim, right? Not very bright, you must be really dim. So we're not sure why he uses this phrasing, but he's saying, danger, danger, don't ask this question. Well, Rashi did not have the Septuagint. Ibn Ezra might have. I would have to look that up. But we have the Septuagint. This is a very, very old text. Do you know the story of the Septuagint? It's amazing. This is the story. You can take it with however many grains of salt you'd like. That's up to you. I'm just telling you the story. The story of the Septuagint is in ancient Israel, which was ruled by Greece. Most of the people walking down the street spoke Greek. Everybody spoke Greek. That was the lingua franca. Forgive the pun. Everybody spoke Greek. Well, this was a problem if you're Jewish and you're living in, say, Alexandria, Egypt, which is a Greek city, and you're trying to live your life as a Jew, but you don't speak Hebrew. I know this is something none of you can relate to. You're all fluent in Hebrew. You just open up the Torah and you don't even need to practice it beforehand. You just chant it perfectly from memory because you're just so fluent, it's in your blood, right? No, this is not a new problem. Over 2,000 years ago, this is 2nd century BCE. This is over 2,000 years ago, well over 2,000 years ago. We had this problem. There were Jews living in Alexandria who spoke Greek and who had access. They were very smart people. They had access to schools and texts and libraries and synagogues with volumes of text, and they read Torah every week, but nobody knew what the Torah meant. So they said, we need a translation. We need a translation of the Torah that's going to be of the Hebrew Bible, the entire Hebrew Bible, in fact. Not just the Torah, not just the 5 books, but all 22 books or 24, depending on how you want to count it. So they got together 70 of the best translators, the greatest scholars of the age. And they put them in 70 separate rooms and they said, okay, each of you make your translation and then we'll take it out and we'll compare the differences between them. And that'll be our starting point for this authoritative translation of the Hebrew Bible. So 70 scholars, they put them all in the 70 rooms, hence the Septu, that's the 70. Put them all in 70 separate rooms. They all stayed in there. I don't know how long. I guess they gave them food and water. Sounds like a pretty bleak existence, although if you know any graduate students who translate ancient biblical texts, it's not such a, it wouldn't be such a step down from the way a lot of them live. You're sort of, in a room with a lot of books, and then that's where you spend 90% of your life. I've fallen asleep in a library more than once where they have to say, you got to go home. Check out the books if you want them, but you got to go home. We can't give you any more books. If you ever go to the library, they tell you that we can't give you any more books. Then you're in it. You're in it up to your neck. So they put these 70 scholars in 70 separate rooms. They came out with their translations, and lo and behold, every single translation, word for word, letter for letter, was identical. And they said, it's a miracle. It's impossible that this could have happened. Clearly, this is a miracle. And so that became the Septuagint. Now, if anybody here working in like printing or marketing, I mean, what a great way to sell a book. If you're trying to sell copies of the Septuagint, this is the kind of marketing you want. Like I said, that's the story of the Septuagint. You can take it with as many grains of salt as you like. I tend to think in my own mind, the way that I sort of translate that into a reasonable story is that there probably were 70 scholars, or at least a large number of scholars, that worked together and consulted and arrived at unanimously arrived at a translation. We know that's how English translations work most of the time. Sometimes you have translations that are just a single scholar, but really the most accurate translations are created by teams of scholars, right? The JPS translation, it's not one person, it's a whole board. Someone mentioned the women's commentary. It was a board of people looking at different parts. And I think that that's probably some reflection of the way this happened, that it was the greatest scholars of the time. They were working together, and this is what they produced. I don't think they made it in 70 separate rooms, but what great marketing, and for sure that's pretty impressive if they did. Well, here's the same verse from the Septuagint. So this is one of the earliest translations or if not the earliest translation, in fact, of the Torah into another language. Now, there are different manuscripts of the Septuagint, so there are some variations, but this passage looks like this. Okay, I don't know what that says. It's all Greek to me. I could hear some groaning. Everybody's muted who's watching, but I could hear groaning after that. Here it is transliterated. I'm sure I'm going to butcher it. I am not a Greek scholar. If it were in Hebrew or even Aramaic, I could help you out. But Greek, I really don't know Greek. Kaepe kain pros able ton adelphon aton deletom estu pedion. I'm sure that there's somebody even in this group right now that's joining us who could probably pronounce that correctly. Maybe we'll try after. Okay, here it is in English. Let's stick with the English. That's a little bit more helpful, right? And Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go to the field." So even 1,000 years before Rashi or Ibn Ezra, we had this version of this verse that had some words in there. In the Greek Septuagint, 2,200 years ago, 21, give or take, we had this phrase that was inserted there. Okay, now we've got to talk about this word vayomer. So we've got this word vayomer. That's the word that gives us the ellipsis. We have vayomer at the beginning of the verse. That's the first word of the verse. Vayomer Cain, and Cain said, quote. Or vayomer, vayomer, how does it go? Vayomer Cain where's my verse starting? Vayomer Cain el Chavel. Chevel Achiv. And Cain said to his brother Abel, quote. Then there's no quote. How do we know that there's supposed to be a quote there? How do we know? How do you make an argument from silence, as we would say? Well, let's start with an even more basic question. Not just how do we know what this word means, but how do we know what any word in the Bible means? We start with a concordance. So, do you know what a concordance is? Just in case, I'll explain it anyway. It's a list of every word in the Bible and how often it occurs and where it occurs. So you can look at a concordance, and people have put these together. and you pick a word. In this case, we're going to pick Vayomer, and you open up the concordance. You go to Vav or V, depends on what. If it's an English concordance, you would look under V for Vayomer, and you would see every single verse where Vayomer occurs. So then what we do is we pretend that we've never heard this word before. We don't know what it means. We imagine it's just a blank. And by the context of seeing it over and over again in different verses, we say, okay, here's what the word seems to mean. It shows up here and it's related to this. It shows up here, it's related to this. That's also how we learn new words as we're learning our first language. You hear a word apple, you don't know what the word apple means. But every time somebody says apple, there's that red fruit, and then you eventually learn, okay, that's what apple means. It's the red fruit, okay? So that's how we determine. It's called a word study. It's a very, very old technique. Goes back hundreds of years in biblical scholarship. Maybe even further than that, in terms of it's used by the rabbis traditionally, even as far back, slight variation. But the rabbis will say, okay, this word shows up here, and the same word also shows up in this other verse where it's used in a particular way. So these could be related, and that goes back, to the early rabbis, thousands of years. By comparing all of these different occurrences of a single word, we can determine what's called the semantic range of a word. So some words are very specific. They have a narrow semantic range. Some words are very broad. Usually this is where I would come up with an example, but it's really not really coming to my mind right now. So if I said, here's a good one. I was having a discussion the other day about a leaf. What do you call a page? And it's the same in Spanish. This is what we were talking about. A sheet of paper or a leaf of paper. And I forget the Spanish word, but it's the same, like leaf on a tree, leaf in a book, right? Are there some Spanish speakers? Okay, I'm seeing nods. Good. Well, if I said leaf, how would you know if I'm talking about a book or a tree? Well, you would look every single time you saw the word leaf, and you would say, okay, sometimes we're talking about, this thing right here. Sometimes we're talking about a tree, but either way, it's a thin, sort of flexible, flat thing, right? That's a leaf. And you know what a leaf is. There's a great one of the great works of American poetry is Leaves of Grass. Right? You've heard that before? Some of the English folks there. That's a play on both the fact that it's talking about grass, but also leaves, like the book that it's in. It's a self-describing poem. That Walt Whitman, very clever guy. So we look at every time the word shows up, and we compare all of those different instances. That's all we have to do. So let's take the word Vayomer. Well, many concordances don't use every conjugation of a word, because you can have a word that's conjugated in a lot of ways. So let's look at the root, Amar. This is the root word, Aleph Mem Resh. You can see there's some extra stuff added to our word Vayomer, but you've got Aleph Mem Resh, Amar. That's the root. That's the basic the pa'al verb, right? It's just the category of verb is called a pa'al. Well, there's the most widely used, most widely known concordance is called Strong's Concordance, named after a guy named Strong. I forget his first name. Someone will let me know after class. They're Googling it right now. I can see it. So this guy, So someone's holding it up to the page. It's too small. I can't see what it says. But I believe you. Maybe everybody else can see it. It's about this big on my screen though. So the Strong's number is the number of the word. So every single word has a number. This is H559. H for Hebrew would be G for Greek, A for Aramaic. And every single word, because Strong was looking at the Christian Bible, so that included the Hebrew Bible and it included the Christian scriptures. So he also had, Greek and Aramaic and other things like that. But the entire Hebrew Bible, you can go through and you've got Hebrew, and this is the 559th word that he identified is Amar. I don't know what his system was for determining what number gets, the order of the different numbers, but Amar gets to go there. I think he divided up Amar as a verb, and so it goes with the verbs. I think that's. I don't know that much about Strong's numbers. Well, now I'm curious, and I'm gonna look at it afterwards. So you've got the Strong. So all we need to do is look at every time that this root shows up in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, and then we'll be able to figure out what it means. So let's see how many times it shows up, and then we're just going to look at all of those right now. We'll go through them all and figure out what it means. We'll do it together. Well, maybe not. As it turns out, Amar is the most common verb in the entire Bible. It occurs over 5,000 times. So we're not going to go through 5,000 occurrences and see how Vayomer is used every single time. Or rather, the root Amar. Let's see if we can narrow it down. We're going to narrow it down a little bit. Vayomer, we're going to use a different concordance called Englishman's Concordance. And this one actually does separate different conjugations of the word. So we're going to look at just where we see Vayomer, not different forms of Amar. Now we've got it down to only 2,000 occurrences. This Vayomer is the most common form of the most common verb in the entire Hebrew Bible. It's actually the word Amar, the verb Amar, or some version of it, actually shows up more than once per verse on average. As I said, it's the most common form of the word. So we're not going to look through every single one, but I spoke to some scholars, and although I couldn't find anybody who's done a comprehensive word study, who has actually gone through every single one of these, in the entire Hebrew Bible, in all of the books, we were only able to find 2 spots where the word Vayomer is not followed by a direct quote. Here, and then there's one other spot where Moses is about to say something, and God sort of interrupts. You could say, right before the 10 Commandments. You can look it up if your Hebrew's good. You can look it up. It's right, but it's the very end of Exodus 19. See, somebody's already there. You got there quick. Did you already know that? You've already done some of this legwork. You, we'll talk after. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so did you find anything else interesting about Vayomer? So there's just those 2. That's same thing you found, right? Really, every single time out of these thousands of times that this word shows up, Vayomer is followed by a direct quote. There are different forms. Sometimes it's Vayomer and then immediately. Sometimes it's Vayomer and then there's a phrase and then the quote comes. But it's always what is that? That's literally, we always say 99.9% of the time. Somebody do the math. I think this is literally is more than 99.9% of the time, right? 2 out of 2,000, that would be 99.9%. Is my math good? 99.9% of the time, we expect a quote. And there's no good reason in the middle of a verse not to have a quote. And Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field. And Cain spoke to his brother, and Cain said, would be better, to his brother Abel, ellipsis, and it came to pass when they were in the field. Let's look at what the Midrash says about it. Rashi says, the Midrash says some stuff, but don't worry about that. That's just going to give you more trouble. It seems like every response to this seems to shift as a distraction in a different direction. It says, don't look at that, look at this. So here, Genesis Rabbah. This is what Rashi was talking about. He said, oh, don't look at that stuff. We're going to look at it. We're going to be rebellious. And Cain spoke to Abel. What were they arguing about? They said, come, let us divide up the world, and one will take all of the land, and one will take the movable property. So they're saying, okay, there's two of us, mom and dad own the whole world, so we each get an inheritance. How should we divide it up? And they said, okay, well, one will own all the land, and the other will own anything on the land will belong to the other one. That seems fair, right? Well, the one said, the ground you're standing on is mine. The other said, what you're wearing is mine. This one says, strip it off. The other one says, fly away. And because of this, Cain rose against his brother Abel and killed him. That's explanation number one. The Midrash continues. Rabbi Yehoshua of Sachnin said in the name of Rabbi Levi, they both took the land and the movable property. So he said that wasn't the issue. They divided it up differently. They said, okay, each one got half of the land, each one got half of the property. Okay, that's not the problem. There's a different problem. What were they arguing about? One said, the holy temple will be built on my land. As it says, they were in the field, and the field only refers to the holy temple. This is what it says, Zion shall be plowed as a field in Micah. Remember how I said that even the ancient rabbis 2,000 years ago, this is about how old Genesis Rabbah is, not quite 2,000 years, even they used this technique of saying we have this word here and we have this word here. They used it a little bit differently than modern scholars, but they drew these connections between verses based on shared words. They said this word sadeh, this word field, it shows up a couple of times, and in the Midrash, it's always connected to, or I should say usually connected to the temple in some way. This word sadeh, this word field. So when they were in the field. So Cain rose up against his brother and slew him. One said, okay, I get to be in charge of the religion. The other one said, no, I get to be in charge of the religion. They fought it out. That's the second answer. Genesis Rabbah continues. This is all one continuous passage. Yehuda bar Ami, a different rabbi, said they were arguing about the first Eve. Rabbi Obo said the first Eve returned to the dust. Remember we talked about the woman before Eve, right? Adam and Eve, Adam v'Chava. Y'all were here for that. You see, the more you come to these classes, they add up. You could do this just by itself and you would get a lot out of it, but when you come to more, they add up. You're all regular attendees. You know this. So what were they arguing about? I said, okay, well, it can't be that first Eve because she was off. She was doing her own thing. Wherever she was, that's what she was doing. Rav Huna said, an extra twin sister was born with Abel. This is a different textual tradition that Abel was actually twins. And this shows up a couple of different places in the Midrash. Um, I don't know why, it just does. There was some ancient tradition that Abel was a twin, maybe because there are so many twins that come later. For some reason, the rabbi said, okay, it's a twin. Often, we know for a fact that very often daughters are not mentioned in the Torah. We know it. In fact, it's rare that they are. We know that there were daughters. Sometimes the Torah will say, this biblical figure lived so long and had sons and daughters. That's a very common phrase. And so had sons and daughters. And then it will go through a genealogy of all the sons, but we never hear about the daughters. Uh, Unless, they become the wives of other people. Sometimes we get a wife that's quoted as, if there's a family connection. It's very rare. Or rather, I should say, it's very common that the daughters don't get mentioned. So that would not be shocking. If if Abel, the second son, was a twin and had a twin sister and it was not mentioned, that would not be so shocking. Because the Torah leaves out daughters a lot. So they said, okay, Abel had a twin who was a girl. And the first one said, this is Cain, well, I should get to marry her. Before you judge too hard, these are the only humans on earth right now, right? Okay. The idea of marrying your sister is not, that comes along a lot later. There are not a lot of options. Cain said, I will marry her because I'm the firstborn. I'm the older one. I should be able to get married first. Abel said, I should get to marry her because we grew up from the womb. I've known her longer than you have. I knew her in the womb. You only met her after she was born. And they couldn't come to an agreement. Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and slew him. Rabbi Juden said, let me pause there. So we've got these three different explanations, right? It's also interesting. Midrash is amazing stuff. We're going to have to do a whole class just about different Midrash sometime. We could do a whole year. The Midrash also tells us that even though Cain was the older one, Abel was stronger. He was physically bigger and stronger. And the reason we know that is because it says Cain rose up. Cain had to basically, jump up in the air. He had to push his brother down to raise himself up. Rabbi Yudin said, "It is not written." Sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. I've got two slides in front of me. So because of this, Cain rose up and slew him. One more little passage from Genesis Rabbah that you'll find interesting. What is the great crime that we're talking about here? Rabbi Yudin said, it is not written your brother's blood in the singular, but rather your brother's bloods, plural, damim, or dameh in this case, which means that Cain was guilty not only of killing Abel, but all of the descendants of Abel, half of humanity that would have come afterward. Nehama Leibowitz. Now, finally, we hear from a woman. Up until now, it's just been men talking, including myself. Finally, we hear from a woman. Nehama Leibowitz is one of the greatest, most respected biblical scholars and commentators that you could find. In her commentary, she writes, it is quite evident from the above citation that the Midrash gives the story of Cain and Abel a universal application. So what are the three things they say? One of them says, you take the earth, I'll take all the possessions. And they fight and kill each other. The second possibility is, no, that wasn't the issue. One said, I get the temple. The other said, I get the temple. They fought and killed each other, right? Well, they didn't kill each other. Cain killed Abel. The third possibility is they were fighting over a woman. So here we have, in the Midrash, it is concerned not merely with the individual case of Cain and Abel. What are we supposed to learn from this? What's the point of this story? And what's the point of the Midrash? What is the Midrash trying to tell us? That's what it's asking here. Three answers of all the reasons, the motives underlying man's desire to quarrel, make war, kill, and murder his fellow. Three answers are given in our Midrash to explain the root causes of bloodshed and murder. According to the first, they're prompted by economic considerations. Why do we fight? Why do we wage war? Because of limited resources, and we can't agree how to spend the limited resources. Do you watch detective shows? It's always money is always number one. Somebody's oh, they did it for the insurance money, right? Or meaning the quarrel over material possessions. According to the second, bloodshed is prompted by religious and ideological reasons. Each side maintaining the temple should be built in his domain and that his religion should be accepted. He's saying, I get the temple. I get to be in charge of the religion. How many wars have been fought due to religious disagreements? And by the way, when I say religious disagreements, that includes atheism. If you've got friends who are atheists, one of the favorite arguments of atheists are, oh, well, I don't believe in religion because all people ever do who are religious, they only fight and they kill and they wage these wars. There were plenty of atheists who killed their fair share of people. And you've got Pol Pot, you've got Mao Zedong, you've got Stalin. There are plenty of atheists who were Robespierre. I mean, French Revolution, what a mess that was, right? Plenty of atheists, in the name of science, have committed horrible acts of war as well. Religious disagreements have the potential to lead to so much fighting. The third reason, the third view, traces its roots of bloodshed to the strife of sexual passion they were disputing over Eve. What is the universal message? Why do people fight? That's really the question that the Midrash is asking. It's not asking the question. Why is this missing? It's saying, here's an opportunity for a new teaching. Now, there's one more important explanation, is how did we end up with this missing phrase? Why is it missing? And this is the part that the slideshow sort of conked out. So I can't show it to you, but there's a textual principle, as one of my teachers called it. It's not a typo, but a scribo, right? Because you're not typing, it's a scribe. So there was a scribo, that these two lines where you have, let me get back to the first slide here. God said to Cain, why are you so distressed and why is your face fallen? Surely if you do what is right, there is uplift. But if you do not do what is right, sin crouches at the door, its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master. Cain said to his brother Abel, let's imagine that the Septuagint either did one of two things. We know the Septuagint said, let us go to the field, right? One of two things happened. Either the Septuagint added that, said, okay, what did they say? There must be some explanation. We saw Rashi came up with his own explanation that says, oh, they were just arguing. He started a fight with him about something else. You've got Ibn Ezra, who says, that he was talking about what God had said. Oh, that came right before, this came right after. So you've got this question of, what did he say? Is it something you can just figure out? Is it obvious? Rashi says, oh, it's obvious. They were starting a fight. Ibn Ezra says, oh, it's obvious. He was arguing, or he was telling Abel about what God had said. Can you believe God told me? I got to get my stuff together, get my act together. Uh, but if it was really obvious, wouldn't they all come up with the same answer? These great scholars? And the Septuagint has a third version, which is that he said, let's go to the field. Where do they get that from? Well, in the next line, it says they went to the field. Okay. One explanation is the Septuagint filled that in. They said, okay, this is obvious. There's supposed to be a quote here. They're about to go to the field. What would he say? Let's go to the field. So that's added into the Greek. The Septuagint sometimes adds things in for clarity when the Hebrew grammar doesn't make sense. Or when the Hebrew grammar doesn't make sense to the Greek, right? When you translate grammar, sometimes you get strange things. There's a second option. The Septuagint is over 2,000 years old, right? We're talking 2,200 years old. The Hebrew text that this is based on, the Masoretic text, the oldest copies that we have are a little over 1,000 years old. The oldest copy of Genesis, in fact, is about not only, I think, only 900 years old. The Westminster Leningrad Codex. Excuse me, just one moment. Okay. I had to check a message. It sounded urgent. I apologize. It can wait. You guys have my full attention. So one explanation is the Septuagint saw there was a grammatical problem and just filled it in. That's the same thing Rashi did. That's the same thing Ibn Ezra does. The second possibility is that the text we have somewhere between when the Septuagint was written over 2,000 years ago and the oldest copy that we have, the Westminster Leningrad Codex, which is about around 1,000 years old. Someone will look it up. That somewhere in there, that phrase was lost. It was copied over and over and over again, and you had a scribe-o, right? Not a typo, but a scribe-o. How could that happen? How could you be copying this sacred text and miss a whole phrase? Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go to the field, and when they were in the field, and it continues. What you have here, according to what's in the Septuagint, is a repetition. Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go to the field. You've got go to the field, right? When they were in the field, so you've got the word field shows up twice. How often have you been reading something and you're reading and reading, and then all of a sudden it doesn't make sense for a second, and you're like, oh, I skipped a line. Or you're reading and reading, and you're like, oh, I read the same line twice. That can happen when you're transcribing, especially if you see the same word appears twice. That's a type of scribal error that is well known and well documented in other texts. So there's a theory among academics that that's exactly what happened here, that this was not taken out because it was so objectionable, but actually that there was an error somewhere along the way, and that there's an earlier Hebrew version of our text that actually has these words in there. That would be earth-shattering if we ever found that text and could actually demonstrate that there's an earlier version of the Torah that's different from what we have, that would change Judaism forever. We don't have that. We don't have, they call it an or text. Well, it's a little bit different, or the or text is a little bit different, but we don't have that earlier version of the Torah that agrees with all of these different small variations that are out there. And in general, we don't consider the Septuagint to be the end-all be-all, because even though it's really old, there's a lot of stuff in there that seems like it was edited, that seems like it was either trying to make things more accessible, or that it was incorporating other traditions. It's okay, this doesn't make sense if you don't have the full story, so we're going to add a little piece of proto midrash, or a little bit of, everybody knows that the fruit was an apple, so we're going to say apple, even though it might not be. So you see this type of thing in the Septuagint, that it seems like there are additions. At the end of the day, what do we do in Jewish tradition, though? We take this text. We say, you know what? There's something strange. There's something problematic here. But it's the text that we have. What can we do with the text that we have? And we can follow that logically, using all the tools that are available to us and all of the great scholarship that's available to us. And we can find deeper meaning from ancient tradition from the rabbis, and even interpreting that in modern context from a 20th century scholar, we find new, deeper meaning. And all of this is from a gap between two words. This is literally wisdom coming from, essentially, from nothing. It's not about what's written there, it's about what's not written there. We've talked about how much wisdom can come from one letter. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the letter Bet and how there's an entire worldview based on the fact that the Torah starts with the letter Bet. Here we did even better. We've gone from one letter to 0 letters to find profound new meaning. The story of Cain and Abel is all about this missing phrase. We don't know what it was. Maybe it was left out on purpose so that we can write in what we know. We can fill in our own understanding of human beings. We know that at the end, it doesn't matter what Cain and Abel were fighting about, because we understand conflict. We understand what people fight about. The message of the story is contained in those first verses. What did God say? Why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen? Surely, if you do right, there is uplift. God's telling Cain, look, you can do teshuvah. I didn't like your sacrifice because you've been messing up in other ways. It wasn't about your sacrifice, but you can use this as an opportunity to rise up and be better. You can rise up from this lowly point that you're at right now. You can rise up, and then you will earn the respect from God, and God will honor you. Cain rises up, but not rising up to do better or rising up to be better. He rises up to kill his brother, to bring his brother down, literally down to the earth. And so, in an attempt to make himself bigger, rather than building himself up, he brings another down. What are the reasons that we bring other people down? Usually it has to do with physical possessions. Oh, someone else just, got the new car, well, probably, you know, cheating someone at their job to be able to afford that. Well, they're probably not really a good person. We say these kinds of things, the jealousy that comes out. Or it's about religion. This person over here is really successful. But they don't have the faith that we do. That church or that temple is growing and successful. Well, they just don't have the faith that we do. We have the real stuff. That's spiritual jealousy. This attempt to take others down a peg in order to raise ourselves up. Or it has to do with sex. It has to do with, not the act of sex, but with relationships, of somebody expressing jealousy of, well, that person's got this, beautiful husband, beautiful wife, and I wish I had what they have. These sources of jealousy that can be opportunities for us to raise ourselves up, or we can choose to bring others down to the point of up to and including murder. That's in our capability as a human being. The story of Cain is not about Cain, it's about us. It's about what we are capable of. It's about how we can rise to an occasion from our failings, or how we can seek to destroy other people. That's the choice that we're left with. That's the story of Cain and Abel. That's all I've got. I'm going to stop the recording here.